In this video, you'll learn everything there is to know about managing your Bubble app's workload. Without these steps we're about to go through, you'll end up building a poorly performing and expensive app. So what we're going to do is break things down into 4 stages so you can build a cost-effective app that can grow long-term instead. The 4 stages we'll cover are beginner, if you're just getting started with your app; intermediate, if you've started building but aren't sure whether you're doing it correctly; corrective, if you've built most of your app but it isn't performing how it should; and advanced, if you're preparing to scale your app. Use this as your guide from start to finish when building your app on Bubble. All right, let's jump right in. All right, let's start by first understanding what even is workload. What does this term mean? Workload is how Bubble measures your application's activity on a monthly basis. Okay, there's lots of different types of activity that your application can carry out. You can perform database searches, you're loading your page designs for your users to interact with. They might be uploading files, they might be manipulating records, right? Creating records, editing, deleting, things like that. There's actually lots of different types of activity that your application can carry out, and not all activity is measured the same. Let's compare this real quick to vehicles and their fuel consumption. A vehicle that is making quick stops in town doesn't need to go very far, doesn't require that much fuel. Compare that to a vehicle that's taking a cross-country road trip, right? Requires a lot more fuel. Let's take that one step further. A vehicle that's going cross-country on completely flat ground in beautiful weather is going to require less fuel compared to a vehicle that's going the same distance, but maybe is going up and down mountains in extreme temperatures, right? There's more fuel consumption that needs to happen there. So just like fuel is going to power the car, your workload is what powers your application. Workload is the fuel for your application. And just like fuel for a vehicle is measured in gallons or liters, workload is measured in what are called workload units in a Bubble application. Okay, so how does workload affect your app's performance? I want to make a very clear distinction here first. Having more workload does not mean you automatically have a better performing app. Okay, remember, workload is just the fuel you need to power the activity in your application. And you are the one that's creating the custom logic, right? The custom instructions for all of that activity. So just like you can have a car idling excessively, right, just wasting gas, nothing is getting accomplished there. You can absolutely find yourself in a similar situation in your app where you've built out features, in excess, things are bloated, things are slow, and you're just wasting workload units. So you do want to follow best practices and build everything with efficiency in mind so that your workload units can take you farther. Okay, it's all a balance. Now, it's also important to remember that not all activity is going to weigh the same. Okay, some activity is more resource intensive than others. So for example, creating a record in the database is going to consume more workload units compared to deleting a record. It's all a balance. Obviously you need your application to carry out certain functions. It's likely solving problems for people. You want to give your users a great experience. So you need to balance that with the efficiency of all the logic happening behind the scenes. And so how does workload affect performance? Well, if you review your application's consumption, and Bubble has plenty of tools for this, you'll want to spot the heavier areas of your app, which areas are actually consuming more workload units. These are great opportunities for optimization, right? If you spot an area where maybe there's a really heavy search of your database going on, right? Maybe you've built things inefficiently, maybe your data structure is contributing to that, and then you can rework it where Bubble is able to carry out that search much faster, right? Much more efficiently. That's likely going to have a positive effect on your user's experience as well. They're probably going to get those search results, displayed back to them a lot faster. And you'll find this everywhere, not just with searches, but every single thing that you do in your application. It's all a balance. Now, how is workload related to your app's cost? Okay, so there's going to be several factors here. First, let's just understand the scale of a workload unit. I mentioned earlier that, you can create a record in the database and that's going to cost a little more than deleting a record. We're talking fractional amounts here. So creating a record will cost 0.5, half of a workload unit, compared to deleting a record, which will cost 1/10 of a workload unit, right? And there are other activity types that are even smaller fractional amounts as well. So obviously, an application that is data-driven, it's very interactive, this stuff will add up, okay? So you want to choose the plan to put your app on that's going to cover all of your activity comfortably. You don't want to hit these limits because otherwise then you'll just be forced to upgrade to the next plan. So let's talk about the plan structure here. Every application has to at least be on any one of the base plans. So this could be the free plan. or any one of the paid tier options. All of these plans come with a certain number of workload units that you can use on a monthly basis. And as an extra bonus, if you are on one of the paid plans, you're also going to be given an extra 100,000 workload units in credit for your development environment. This way you have more freedom to stress test things, make mistakes, go through more trial and error, and generally just use things a little bit more heavily because you are building things out, you're figuring things out, and your activity there is going to look different from, your live environment once you release things to your users. Now, on top of that, if you need more than your plan allows, you can optionally add what's called a workload tier. This doesn't give you access to any more features or capabilities in Bubble. It simply gives you more workload units that you can use. And there are multiple tiers that you can choose from here. This is a great kind of in-between add-on so that you don't necessarily have to jump up to the next base plan, which could be more expensive. So these workload tiers can be a nice kind of in-between step just to get you more workload units, okay? Now, a third optional component is what are called overages. So if you need to enable overages, now you're entering into this like pay-as-you-go system. So if you've exceeded in your monthly billing cycle, if you've exceeded the number of workload units that your base plan gave you and optionally your workload tier gave you, then you can go into overages. So here you're just paying a rate for every extra 1,000 workload units that you consume. It's up to you whether you want to enable these overages or not. You can keep them turned off if you need to control your monthly bill a little bit more, but just beware that if you do exceed your allowed workload units and your billing cycle is still not done, and you don't have overages enabled, your app's going to be taken offline. Okay, so different applications that might be it might be smart to keep those on. Some applications might just be more predictable, and so as long as you have the right plan and potentially workload tier where you know that you're comfortably going to be covered, you can keep those overages off. Now, the combination of these three things together will contribute to your monthly total. Bubble also has annual pricing for these subscriptions, so you get a little bit of a discount there as well. So what does this all mean? It just reinforces the fact that you want to stay efficient with how you build everything in your application so that you're not forced to go up a higher plan or add on all of these extra packages just to support, your app's activity. If you're efficient with everything and you're using less workload units in any given month, then your cost can stay down as well. Now, I do want to make another distinction if you're having trouble figuring out which base plan you need to put your app on. The plan differences are not just about the number of workload units you get. There's actually a whole host of features and capabilities that you can get access to. The higher the plan, the more access you have to certain things. So just like, a newer car may be inherently more fuel efficient, right? Because it has a better engine, it has newer technology. The higher the paid plan you go with Bubble, you will get more access to more workload units, and you'll also get access to more features that just may make things more convenient. But it just really depends on what's appropriate for your application. If you're just a solo entrepreneur building out a simple tool, the higher plans may just be excessive for you, right? You may be just fine on the lower plans. Whereas if you are in a team environment or an enterprise environment, you may need to get access to those higher level capabilities to support, more complex functionality behind the scenes. Bubble actually has a really helpful tool here called the Subscription Planner to help you calculate what's going to be the best combination of these different package options for your app. I highly recommend you take a look at this once you start to get a better picture of what your workload needs are and which features you want to take advantage of within these different plan tiers. So the first thing that you'll want to select is which billing cycle you want to be on. If you choose annual, all of the plans are discounted a little bit. So notice here for starter, it's $29 a month if you pay annually compared to the monthly option is just a few dollars more, $32 a month. Okay. Now you'll see also that the number of workload units the plans give you is listed down below. That doesn't change based on your billing cycle. That's going to be the same. So let's say that we want to go with the starter plan. And we estimate that we only need, let's say, 100,000 workload units to carry out our app's activity consistently on a monthly basis. So I'm going to say 100,000 here, right? That is well within the allowed units on this plan. So Bubble's going to tell me, all right, that is all you need. It's going to be a very predictable monthly bill. It's just that $32 a month for the plan, nothing else. Now, let's say that I need a little bit more than 175,000, but not quite 250. Let's say I need 200,000 workload units. I'm going to remove the one here. Whoops. Okay, we'll type it in again. Like this, calculate. All right, so if I stay on the starter plan, that's not going to cover me for the full 200,000. I can expect to pay 750 additional if I enable my overages. I don't even need another workload tier added to this. The overages is enough to get me the extra workload units to close that gap between the 175 and the 200,000. And I can expect for my monthly bill to be $39.50, right? That is significantly cheaper compared to jumping up to the growth plan, which, yes, would also cover my 200,000 units needed, but it's just more cost effective to enable overages for this. Okay, now again, you do need to make sure that the plan you choose is the one that you need. It might be that you just need features within the growth plan that the starter plan does not give you, even if you don't need that many workload units. So make sure that you choose the base plan first to support the features you need access to. Let's take a look at another example. Let's try doing, let's say 400,000. I'm going to see if I can get this to calculate with the workload tier. Here we go. All right, so I'm on the starter plan. I need 400,000 workload units. The growth plan would cover it. The team plan would also cover it. Or sorry, the growth plan wouldn't cover it. The team plan would, but going from $32 a month to $399 a month is a significant increase. I don't need to do that in order to cover my 400,000. All I need to do is add a workload tier, and this is just the first level of tier for an additional $29 a month. This is on top of my base starter plan for $32 a month, right? Those combined will give me 175 plus 200, so now I have 375. And then if I enable overages, that'll close the gap between the 375 and the 400,000 that I'm estimating. And I have a significantly lower monthly bill, right? $64.75 compared to even the growth plan, right? Which wouldn't even cover my 400,000 expected, right? So this little calculator tool is really helpful for making sure that you find the best plan possible for your needs. All right, now if you've already started building your application in Bubble and you're not exactly sure you've been addressing all of the right places to maximize your workload, I'm going to take you through the top areas that can really make the biggest impact in your application's efficiency overall. Every Bubble application, no matter how simple or complex, will need to perform database searches at one point or another. And the complexity of a search can vary. You may be searching through a table of 10 records or 10,000 or 100,000. You may have 0 filters on that search, or you might need to add on filters with extra modifications such as grouping the search results for a chart in your page design. The more complex the search, the more likely it is to consume more workload units. Now, complex searches aren't necessarily a bad thing, but you need to make sure you're searching with the path of least resistance. This may mean revisiting your data structure to create more direct pathways to specific field values. Maybe it means pre-calculating values to avoid expensive real-time calculations and manipulations on the page. Also, make sure that when you add a search expression that it's actually the most appropriate approach. You might find that you've already found the list of search results in another area of your design, such as in a repeating group, a custom state, or even the result of a workflow action. Don't ask Bubble to perform more searches than it really needs to. Take advantage of the fact that you can create shortcuts to your data sources for yourself. Again, with custom states, workflow actions, container elements, and inputs. Try to get in the habit of designing your pages so that resources can be shared as much as possible across all of your features. Imagine you are a teacher in a classroom of 50 students, and everybody needs to follow the same instructions to carry out a task. Now, instead of writing down those instructions 50 different times on 50 different pieces of paper and handing them out to all 50 students, you just write those instructions once on a whiteboard at the front of the class. Not only are all of your students looking at the exact same thing, okay, so you have consistency there, but you've also saved yourself some time and you've reduced paper waste. Okay, so there are many ways for you to set up your data sources on a page so that they can be shared across different features occurring on that page. And you really reduce the work that needs to happen behind the scenes to carry out all of those functions. For example, let's say you have a list of transactions in your database, but you want to display them on your page 2 different ways, in a repeating group and in a chart. Instead of writing 2 separate search expressions in each element, you can use a custom state to hold the value of your list of transactions. From there, each element can refer to the single custom state value. This doesn't prevent you from manipulating the list differently in each element. Maybe the repeating group needs to stay unfiltered, whereas the chart should have a specific constraint on that list. You can still perform those operations on the single custom state data source within the separate elements. Alternatively, because there are only 2 elements involved, you could have the repeating group perform the search and then have the chart reference the repeating group. Now you don't even need to manage a custom state. I will say that if there are more than 2 features or visual elements that need to reference the same list source, consider using a custom state or a repeating group that's hidden to serve as that primary reference. It can really save you from having to duplicate those searches further. Speaking of duplication, you want to keep a close eye on your repeating groups and table elements. Because these are working with dynamic lists of things, it's really easy to multiply activity very quickly. For example, if you have a search expression inside of a repeating group cell and your repeating group is, outputting 100 list items, you've just multiplied that search 100 times, right? So take a look and see if you can reduce that search into a reference that is going to consolidate those data sources, or perhaps page your repeating groups so that you're not necessarily showing, an entire database table of things all at once. To the user, right? There's many different variables that can help you keep things contained, but be very, very mindful of what exactly it is you're building inside of a cell that could multiply because of the nature of the repeating group and table elements. Now, the next thing you'll want to keep in mind are any database modifications that are happening in bulk. So in the workflows, there are actions to copy a list of records, make a change to a list of records, and delete a list of records. And these are also going to have a multiplying effect. Now, this isn't bad necessarily. They're just areas that you want to be very mindful of because they can take up a lot of workload units very quickly. Let's say that you have an import function that you're allowing your users to come in with a CSV file. There is a chance that somebody comes in with a file with, thousands of rows, and that could mean that they end up creating thousands of records. Now, again, it's not a bad thing. It may just mean that, you want to put in protections in place, maybe set limits on your users so that you can control their consumption, or perhaps it can be a part of your business model, right? If they're going to use the app more heavily, then they might need to subscribe to a higher plan with you in their own access of your application. And in general, making changes to your records in fewer actions will likely mean that you're consuming less workload units as well. So for example, let's say that you're trying to make a change to a user's record, kind of profile details. Instead of separating out each individual field into separate make a change actions, right? One action for updating the name, another action for updating the phone number. Use one action instead and map all of the fields all at once, even if they're not going to make a change to every single field. As long as your initial contents are set to those inputs, then you're really maximizing the efficiency of that action. It'll handle all the different scenarios that a user may encounter when updating their profile. Now, there's also another principle here that I want you to keep in mind in everything you do when you're building your application, and that is carrying out activity when you need it, not in case you need it. Okay, I often see with page designs, there are a handful of pages loaded workflows, right? As soon as the page is loaded, we're setting custom states to do database searches, we're calculating values, right? All of this expensive activity is happening right at the start. And if there's a chance that the user never needs to reference those calculated values or that fetch data, you've just wasted a lot of workload units. So see if you can find more appropriate times to trigger your activity. Now, of course, every app is different. There are certainly going to be edge cases where you really do need to have things happening as soon as the page is loaded, but review those things in your application. See if that's even necessary to have all of that activity happening at the start. You might be surprised. There might be more appropriate areas where you can wait until the user has taken a specific action to then set those custom states, search for that data, right? So that you can reduce the amount of workload consumption that's happening in that moment for that user. Now, Bubble does have some helpful settings that you can take advantage of, and I do encourage you to look at all of these to see which one you may want to enable to help you put protections in place so that if you are about to encounter or are in the middle of encountering an unexpected spike in your workload consumption, you can help control it. So the first thing is disabling overages. We mentioned this earlier in this video, but overages are a pay-as-you-go type of system where, after you've exceeded your monthly allowance, you can pay an additional additional amount for every additional 1,000 workload units that you are using. This makes your bill more variable, right? Because it's just going to depend on what you've actually consumed that went beyond your monthly allowance. It's up to you to enable this or keep it disabled. Now, the next setting is workload notifications. Bubble has automatic notifications that it'll send you, so it'll let you know once you're at 75% of your allowance, 100% of your allowance. You can also create custom notifications so that you can define your own thresholds. That way you can stay ahead of the game and make any adjustments as necessary. And then the third setting is infinite recursion protection. So what this means is if you have backend workflows that are recursive, so on a loop, right? The workflow is scheduling itself to run again. You are in control of the looping logic. It's up to you to define the delay between each run in the loop, whether the loop stops or not. And it's really easy to create kind of a workflow that just gets away from you and it's running back to back to back and really using up a lot of workload units and not intending to. So these are settings that can help you put a limit where once it's reached, a certain number of runs, it'll actually stop the loop for you so that, in case you miss it, it doesn't run away from you and you end up with the app being taken offline or potentially a really high bill if you had your overages enabled. All right, real quick, if you're finding this helpful, but you're really looking to take things deeper and are looking for step-by-step guidance on how to build your Bubble app correctly, our other founders are doing so right now using our Fast Track course. That's been designed to cut months off your development time and keep you from having to rebuild your app. So the link is on the screen right now, and I'll also include it in the description below so that you can check it out too. All right, so you have an application that is built. It's functioning. It's doing what it's supposed to. You might even have live users working with the app. But maybe it's not performing exactly the way that you'd like for it to. Maybe some pages or operations are slower. Maybe behaviors aren't very consistent. Maybe there's a reliability issue with some of your functionality. What can you do to make corrections here? Well, the first place I would point you to are your app metrics. You can find app metrics in the Logs tab. Now, I have an application's app metrics open here so that I can demonstrate kind of what I would do if I were going to investigate, areas to optimize. Now, this is an application that has been live for many years on Bubble, and over the last 30 days, the consumption amounted to 180, I'm going to round up a little bit, 187,000 workload units. And we can see that on a daily basis, there's fairly consistent activity day by day in terms of the consumption there. So the first thing that you want to do is come down into this donut chart here and tackle the biggest areas first, the largest piece of the chart that is consuming the most number of workload units, because that is likely going to point you to areas that can be optimized more. They're going to be more complex logic. There might be a higher volume of activity that's happening. Now, this is certainly not a black and white thing. You may have things optimized as much as possible, and you just simply have a more complex application. Also, the number of workload units consumed is not a direct reflection of performance. All I'm saying here is that there is more opportunity to find areas to optimize. So what I would do from here is I'm going to click into this so it can drill down just a little bit. Notice, by the way, let me go back one, that really the biggest piece of the pie, it's scheduled workflows, right? This application has a huge dependency on backend workflows that are running, a lot of them in a recursive manner, actually daily workflows that are running. There's a lot of automation happening to help users, make things happen more conveniently. There's a lot of problems being solved for this industry. And it's really, there's just a huge dependency on backend workflows. So that's just the nature of this particular app. So I'm going to click into this, and then we can see, they're all labeled here. These are all the various backend workflows that are running, with one in particular taking up the biggest piece of the pie again. So I'm going to click into this, and Bubble's going to drill me down even further into the actions within that backend workflow. And then from here, I'm just going to drill down into one of these actions. Eventually, Bubble will take me to that exact spot in the editor, and I can review all of the expressions and see if there are any areas that I can simplify or optimize. If you don't know where to start in your application, using the data that you see here is going to guide you in a much, much more helpful and efficient way, so that you're really just not guessing in where your app needs to be optimized or has opportunities to optimize. You'd actually be surprised where some areas might be heavier than you thought. So use the data that you see here to help guide you. Now, switching over to a different application, we have a very different picture here. So this one is using less workload units over the month, 55,000 about for the last 30 days. And it's really clear in this one that this is a work week only application. You know, every few days we have 2 days off. There's the weekends, I would imagine. We have our 4th of July holiday here. Okay, and you know, this one has a very different split in activity. In fact, this one doesn't even have any dependencies on backend workflows. It's a very different type of app. And so it's almost about 50-50 split between workloads and fetching data. Again, I would just kind of drill down into each piece and see if I can identify spots where I can simplify, where I can consolidate, aggregate, maybe make some adjustments to my data structures to make some of my logic more efficient, easier for Bubble to carry out some functions, right? All of this is a matter of now reviewing the data that you have and tackling the areas with the biggest pieces here so that you can make the biggest impact. Now, if you need more granular data about a particular workflow and how many workload units were consumed per action, then your server logs are going to be a great tool to help you pinpoint those details. This is the second subtab here in your logs section, just next to the app metrics. And you'll see that every action is going to have listed the number of workload units consumed. So here, for example, we have the creation of a record and it consumed 0.63 of a workload unit. This can be very helpful if you have super complex workflows with many actions within them. That way you can quickly spot the ones that are heavier and point you in a direction in terms of where you should be putting more of your energy. Now, alongside this, another helpful tool to just help you pinpoint things is the app search tool. It's this magnifying glass in the upper right corner. Now, this isn't going to list workload units for you, but it can help you scan your entire application for common expressions or elements that are hotspots for heavy workload consumption. For example, I can search the entire application by the data source. Let's click on this here. Of do a search for, right? That's a very common source in order to fetch data from your database. You have all sorts of other options here as well. But doing a search is a very popular data source, and it's also an area that can be overdone. So if I search this entire application for all do a search for expressions, you'll see that this gives me 237 places in the whole app that uses that. Now, again, it's not necessarily wrong that there are that many searches. You know, that might be necessary, but it can help you find where you're doing those searches, especially if your app has grown, right? And you've maybe lost track of these things so that you can see, you know, maybe we can consolidate those searches into other data sources. Maybe we can take advantage of custom states a little bit more to reduce those numbers. And, you know, if you do that enough and stack those savings up enough, it could make an impact in the overall efficiency and potentially performance of the application. So searching across your entire app for, you know, commonly heavy operations or even visual elements, right? If you search your entire app for any repeating group, that's another hotspot for potential duplicative activity. We would search by element type and then search for the repeating group here like this. And click on search, it'll show me all of those. So there's 19 repeating groups in this particular application. You can also select this box here so that you're only searching on the page that you're on if you know that you generally just need to pinpoint a known page that is likely to be on the heavier side. Now, for those of you who are ready to scale your application, at this point you should already be comfortable with the things that we've talked about in this video and have had much more exposure and experience with identifying these different areas of your app and, you know, understanding what you need to do to get creative and smart with your own application's logic. So where do you go from here? How can you ensure that your application's workload efficiency is going to scale with you? That you're not going to make maintenance of the application more difficult, or that your app's going to hit some kind of a performance ceiling? Well, Bubble's own workload framework recommends we keep 3 areas in mind at all times: complexity, volume, and repetition. Complexity can mean a lot of things. It can speak to complicated filters, multiple manipulations, multiple data sources, dependencies, chaining workflows with many actions, each with their own searches and filters, and more. If you plan on building highly customized interactions, automations, and data updates, you may experience higher consumption of workload due to the increased complexity. As you scale, it'll become even more important to ensure every expression, every part of your design is built with intention. Try not to get lazy with anything because wasted workflow units can add up. Volume is about the amount of data you're working with. This can either be as a result of a search that returns many records, or it can be related to records that are individually large in size. Imagine a marketplace listing that has a field which holds a list of dozens of high-resolution images, right? This would be a data structure problem. You'd want to break down that data type so that images are stored separately. Because if you multiply the size of that record across an entire table of similar records, that's really going to weigh you down every time you need to find listings. Volume can also speak to an accumulation of many data sources coming together where each source is undergoing its own set of activity. We see this often in single page applications where literally all functionality lives in one page. So there's a bigger emphasis on only executing activity here when you need to. Otherwise, there could be way too much going on at once, leading to slow page loads and, if you're not careful, conflicting workflows that can create inconsistent, if not broken, behavior. As you scale, you may see a natural increase in volume purely from growing your user base, expanding to larger markets, injecting more content into your app, and more. Some of the increased workload consumption may be more predictable if your current activity is consistent enough. Make sure your app has access to the workload units it needs before it's too late. Unless your growth is tightly controlled, make it a part of your app's maintenance plan to review your consumption on a regular basis. Now, I've mentioned repetition a few times earlier in this video, but excessive repetition is a quick way to use up a lot of workload units. The multiplication factor that comes with repeating groups and recursive workflows needs to be closely monitored, or at least planned for. Repetition also speaks to carrying out activity more than you really need. Do you need to run all of those actions when the page is loaded? Do your recursive workflows need to run that frequently? A common example of a repetitive activity is updating a data record many more times than needed. If you have a form, for example, with 20 inputs, you have a choice. Create an autosave experience where the record is modified every time an input is changed. That could be up to 20 times, right? And then the user doesn't have to worry about clicking on a save button. They can leave and come back, and their changes are saved for them. Or you can wait for the user to click a save button, which saves all of the inputs at once. That's one modification to the record, which uses less workload units. However, it gives the user a different experience because if they leave before clicking on the save button, they lose all of their changes. There's no right or wrong here necessarily. If the expense of the autosave experience is worth it to you, then go ahead. You'll run into decisions like these throughout your app. So if you're looking to stay efficient long-term, make sure you address the heaviest areas of your app first. Often, the heavier areas are the more custom ones. They may even be the more valuable ones. How valuable is up to you. All right, I hope that was helpful. And if it was, the content you're about to see on the screen next will help you take things even further.